Welcome, friends, to episode 350 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we induct the 2025 class into our Adaptation Hall of Fame. So we are back with our Hall of Fame episodes. This is our second one we've ever done. And we decided this year what we're going to do is celebrate 350, middle of the summer, with our second ever class. And then decouple going forward Hall of Fame away from our 50-ish episode celebrations and have it just be a standalone thing we do every summer. That way it's always kind of about a year apart. Right now it's actually like a year and a half, so there's a lot of new eligible titles. But yeah, I mean, I know we have some setting up to do to explain what this is, but first off, I just want to highlight that this is 350 episodes for us. Pretty cool milestone. It's one of those, like, the numbers have gotten so big now that I'm like, 350, 400, like, what does this even mean? It just is a lot, and it's kind of crazy that it's gotten this big, but, it's good to pause every now and then, I think, and celebrate how far we've come.
Yeah, and especially just because we've fallen into such a routine. We've gone through a pandemic, continued to do it during that, and, like, that was already so many years ago at this point. We're actually, like, some of these are projects we covered right up to 2020.
Yep.
Which is so crazy to think about. But yeah, 350 episodes. It's humbling thinking about the number of people who've listened and the number that we've continued going. I think is an impressive feat. I'm pretty proud of that. It's just crazy to be here at 350 and then be like, well, 400 will be here before we know. And it's like,
I know, like, it seems like it's flying by.
Yeah.
That's life for you, man. Yeah, surreal. But so the Hall of Fame induction, what we decided to do, first off, I've got myself a beverage here from my Adaptation malt that I talked about in our last episode. So cheers to everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for sticking with us. And then, let's explain what the Hall of Fame is. So we invented this thing for episode 300. We took our inspiration from the NFL and how they do their Hall of Fame. Probably other sports leagues are similar. In the sense of, in those leagues, a player needs to be retired for 5 years before they become eligible to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So similarly, what we decided is we need to have covered a project over 5 years ago. That's the cutoff. That way we have sufficient distance from us covering it to where recency bias doesn't really play in, and we can decide if it deserves getting into the Adaptation Hall of Fame. And then we decided to limit ourselves to 3 slots per year, which makes this a very difficult process, and it only is going to get more difficult as we go, as we start to get a logjam of really, really good titles that are all deserving. Definitely this year, that's the case.
I mean, yeah, we definitely check out our Deliberations episode if you haven't already.
Yeah.
It's going to be on Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film. We had 10 each, so we brought possibly 20 projects. It didn't end up being that many, but we brought 10 each, and we whittled down to these 6, which we'll talk about. And
even that was tough.
It was really hard. And then now this is going to be such a tall, impossible task.
Yeah.
And last year, just for those who haven't listened, last year we inducted 3, and the 3 were Jurassic Park, The Fellowship of the Ring, and Godfather, of course.
Yeah.
So those were,
super
the
deserving.
Magnitude of
no regrets about any of those. Those are all bangers that deserve to be in. I love that as our first class. But we had 3 that were like right at the edge that we were arguing over. Some of those made it to this year. Some of them didn't. We can get into all of that. It's an interesting process, man. And it's kind of like why do we force ourselves to do this? It's just interesting. It's fun. So, don't take it with a grain of salt if your favorites don't get in. It's okay. They might make it in future years. It's not that we don't like them. We're just having to make very hard decisions here.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different variables at play of what's the better adaptation, what's the better film, we try not to bring too much of our bias, but inherently there's going to be some of our own personal taste in here. Yeah. So that with all that said, if you like these 6 films, they all deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, I would say. It's just whether or not they can.
If you make it to this episode for these final 6 discussions, I feel like that means you're deserving. It's just whether or not there's slots for it, right? And that's going to be the discussion. Last year, I also unveiled my 3 pillars of adaptation, which is actually something I've talked about on a couple panels now. It's become a useful sort of shorthand for how I think about adaptations and what makes the best ones. And that, once again, is the expression of the original. So whatever it was, essentially awesome and memorable and artistic and valuable about whatever piece of work you're adapting, how much of that is expressed in the adaptation itself. That doesn't mean you have to do everything, but the things that are there, how much of it is captured. And then changes are the things that are like you fundamentally have to change for adaptation. That's something we've seen time and again. And so when you change things from one medium to another, how do you express it in the film medium? And how effective are the changes at telling the story in a new way? So that's my second pillar. And then the third pillar is just like overall film quality, because I always argue that no matter how faithful or how effective the changes, if the final product isn't an excellent film, then it doesn't deserve to be in our Hall of Fame. That is an essential part of making it into the Hall of Fame of the best adaptations to ever do it, because we all want to see amazing films made out of the things that we love. Yeah. And then I have the option for 2 bonus points. One of them is for culturally, historically significant, similar to, I feel like the Library of Congress does something like this. Yep. I'm not defining it necessarily in the same way, but kind of inspired by that. Like, does it seem like this film is somehow really important to film history, or is going to be an iconic thing going forward where people are going to be inspired by it? Really like sort of indelible mark in film history. I give it a point for that. And then similarly, performance is something that I think is so essential to a great film. And I wanted to be able to award a bonus point for movies where there is at least one truly iconic performance that may or may not be like sort of career defining. Everybody goes to it. Everybody thinks of it all the time. And I tried to make both of those points very difficult to award. Like, they truly need to be deserving, because they're kind of like, for me, like could be tiebreaker kind of points when it comes down to like figuring out what deserves to make it in and what doesn't. That being said, this was a very difficult year to do this. And some of my ratings, I'm not like 100% sure on, and I'm open to talking with you about like whether or not, you know, I should change the number on one of them. But I'm going to save the reveal for my ratings until after we present each of the films, which will be the next thing we do here.
I'd said last year, and I still kind of stick by this, is that like I feel like that all that data that you compile is really helpful for me, and it's like an important thing. But for me, I also am going off of like somewhat like emotional response. I'm going off of like intentionality of filmmaking, like a lot. There's other factors I think
just
at
your
play.
Gut, right? Like you like following your gut.
Yeah, and we had a conversation before this, just talking about like the ones that get the best score may not end up in the final 3, and that's through this like kind of conversation back and forth. But also you said on your own is just like it might not be what you end up choosing, but I think it is a helpful tool, like you said.
It's a tool for me because I am someone who likes to think about these things with some analytics. Honestly, it's just like get away from purely emotional reactions. So I like it, but it is just a tool, and ultimately I'm the one deciding these numbers for my ratings, so it's like it's all subjective. So we'll take that with a grain of salt when we get there. But what we've done, we picked our 6, and then we divided those up. You can listen to our episode to figure out like why we divided them the way we did. But we divided those up between the two of us because we can't watch 6 films in a week. But we did each watch 3. I think we'll go back and forth with the ones we watched. Each take a moment to present them and make the case for why that film, that adaptation, deserves to be in our Hall of Fame. And then, you know, it'll be essentially laying the groundwork for the discussion that we will have following that. We set ourselves to this task, so we have no one to blame but us for this. But here we go. So do you want to kick things off, or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll kick things off. And I think it's a cool way to do this. There was a film that was cut last year, a Spielberg film that was cut last year, right before we got to this final 6 deliberations, because we had Jurassic Park and we had Jaws.
Yeah.
This year, Jaws came back around, and it made it into the final 6. Spielberg invented the modern blockbuster, some incredibly iconic performances. You have Spielberg really defining who he was going to become as a filmmaker and doing kind of his like Hitchcock shark kind of thing. It's the stuff of legend at this point, Bruce the Shark, and the way that they had to use less of it, and that John Williams score that's so iconic.
Based off a Peter Benchley novel, we should say.
A pulpy novel that I think neither of us were super impressed with when we read it.
Yeah, it was okay, but you know, nothing close to what the movie is, I think.
Obviously, Spielberg took this and, like I said, redefined something and made this like mythic, primal film that like to this day is so watchable. And it's like, we actually in our deliberation in the bonus episode, we're talking about it, and you graciously let me watch this one. It's such a good summer watch.
It's a great summer movie, man. Yeah. I love it.
And like watching it, I mean, we grew up in the Space Coast. There's like the shark like attack capital of the world is like right there north in like New Smyrna. And it's like, to me, I have a respect for sharks, and we talked a lot in our coverage and stuff, but like having a shark become a monster and be like an entity that's like otherworldly monstrous it's like a really fun thing, and it
comes to represent like the just nature, right, and the unpredictable destructive force of nature.
Well, and the hubris of man, right? Like we're gonna catch this thing, and we're gonna, and like in multiple facets, we're gonna catch it, and also like the mayor saying like we're gonna keep the beaches open, and all these things about the nature of humans and greed, I would say.
Yeah, man, there's so much good storytelling in that movie. I always like the stuff everybody remembers about that movie is like the chumming for the shark, like the guys out on the boat singing with each other.
Farewell,
it's a great scene
to you, Spanish ladies.
Yeah, telling the story of
the Indianapolis,
which is a really iconic moment. But there's just so much good storytelling in this movie from the jump, setting up the situation in the town, like you said, the stuff with the government and the mayor who's trying to cover things up. Like it's talking about more than just a shark, right? At that point, it's talking about the way people are and how we deal with danger and how capitalism comes into play and people don't want to lose money and that's valued over people's lives. And there's just so many great messages in that movie. And it's so well made. It's cool to see Spielberg so early on in his career. And then of course, like the making of that movie is like the stuff of legend, right? With the shark and, the way they had to show it so little and because they couldn't get it to work, and like Spielberg being smart enough to know like maybe I can just hint at the shark here instead of showing it, and that could be effective, and he ended up like defining how you do a movie like this because it was so effective.
Well, and it's like a horror movie too. Like it's a thriller, but it's also a horror movie, and it's cool to see Spielberg doing that so early on, and like horror movies being something that first time directors step out into the world with is like such a usual thing, but this is like such a rare case because it wasn't that cheap. Like normally you're thinking like, oh, cheaper horror films, and then you can get it people are excited to go get thrilled in the theater. This was a film that like it had all these disasters. They're trying to film from boats, and it's famously one of the films that like was like, don't film on the water, just don't do it. It's so logistically hard to do, and it's cool. I actually like have had some conversations and know one of the technically the son, but I have met one of the people who did a lot of the underwater photography for Jaws.
Oh, cool.
Like, yeah, a lot of the camera work, which is really, really cool, and something that I actually have found myself enjoying more and more, becoming a diver and then filming underwater. And like I find a lot of the stuff that they did here really cool. Like anytime there were like the POVs of going through the reeds and all the weeds and everything, seaweed and everything underwater, and using that to like obscure the shark, and even like Hooper being like a diver and getting in the shark cage. It's like so many of the things that make like sharks iconic. And like I said, I have a respect for sharks, but I don't fear them in the way that this film wants you to.
Yeah.
And I feel kind of bad because they get a bad rap a lot of the time. Sharks do. People are just like terrified.
Well, we talked about Peter Benchley, like for the rest of his life became like a big conservationist around sharks, I think, because he kind of felt bad about what his novel had done. And, I try and look at it more as like a mythological, tale. And like I love that, you have Hooper representing sort of science and man and like book learning and study. And then you have, Quint, the old salt, who represents like old knowledge and just experiential knowledge of the sea, and like, it doesn't have anything to do with school learning. And the two, and how they butt heads, but then how they come to like work together, and how it shows that when the two sides come together, that's like when they're at their most powerful. Like, it's just really, really interesting, and so many smart things were done with those characters. I don't know. I love that movie so much. There's a reason that I watch it as often as I do.
And the amazing use of that like dolly zoom on the beach where he's like the realization.
How many times have we seen that shot? I don't know if he invented it, but that is like one of the most memorable ones. Yeah.
That is the push pull that people, that and the one from Vertigo are the ones that people think of.
Yeah.
When they think of that shot. And then just again, John Williams, the dun dun.
Yeah.
Dun dun.
Like one of the most iconic simple scores of all time, right?
It's so simple and it's so effective.
One of the most recognizable ones. You just play that for anybody and they know what it is.
Yep, 100. They haven't even seen the movie. They probably know what it is. Yeah.
We got to move on to keep things going here. I'm going to go in the order in which I watched my films.
Me too, actually. I watched Jaws first.
Okay. So I'm going to start off with The Shining. The Shining is what I watched first. This is a movie I did not watch last year, but this is our first our first movie that has made it back. That was in the original 6 and is now back in the 6. This was our hardest one to cut last year. So I wanted to kind of go in fresh, give it a fresh shot. What a brilliant film. Stanley Kubrick, there's so much could be said about him. We have said a lot about him, but the meticulous storytelling, the way he is a master of film, and the way he's a master of every aspect of what's shown on screen, so much so that he has like created this mythos around himself, or his fans did, that became so much larger than life, where every aspect of this film has been analyzed, probably more than any other movie ever.
It's got to be up there, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like everything, like the fact that there's a Tweety bird on the wall at one point, and then it comes back and there's no Tweety bird, and what does that mean? And like everything is layered with these meanings, and maybe he faked the moon landing. He didn't. And like, there's all these like
he did not.
Yeah, we watched a documentary about some of the crazy conspiracies around this film, and it's just wild. When we're talking about like culturally important movies, this is like one of the most, I think, ever. And then just as a horror movie, it's slow paced. It's full of vibes. It's the kind of movie that I love. This is the kind of horror that I love. And then while it's telling a story that's about a supernatural entity and a haunted place, it is at the same time telling us a story about the darkest sides of humanity in the form of Jack Torrance, that is so familiar for so many people who have encountered this kind of abuse in their life. And we see a man who, in the film at least, is like at the edge of a breaking point and is pushed over it by the hotel. And then all that being said, of course, this is an adaptation of what many would argue, and I might join them, is Stephen King's greatest novel. This is an amazing novel by Stephen King, and it's different. And this has this, famous legacy of Stephen King disliking the adaptation. And yet, it's incredible. And one of the reasons that I think he dislikes it is that some of the changes that were made were pretty seismic in the message of the story and the content of the story. And yet, they were done because Kubrick wanted to tell a slightly different story. And I think that story is incredibly effective. And yeah, just watching it further solidified how I feel that this is just an incredible movie that I will defend to people who try and say it is a terrible adaptation, because I just don't agree. I think this is an incredible adaptation, even if it isn't the most faithful adaptation, and I will grant you that.
Yeah, I've heard I've heard tons of takes about a lot of different movies, but for The Shining specifically, even outside of it, the adaptation, I've heard people say like they don't like the movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the film is so intentionally off-putting, like so much about it, like whether it's subliminal or not.
It's kind of a tough watch.
Like it makes you feel weird. It makes you feel like something is off. It makes you feel like on edge, which I think is like a sign of something that's like really deeper than like to have all of that atmosphere be coming out of every frame of the film and be so consistent in that way. And yeah, you already talked about Kubrick, but like how meticulous he is to the point of being overbearing in some regards and like almost cruel in some people's eyes and by some reports.
Sure, controversial.
But he is somebody who stands on that pinnacle of like people who had such a mastery over the medium and like he wrote and like changed this in such wild ways. But like when I think of The Shining, and I agree, I think The Shining is among Stephen King's best books that I've read, but I think of Kubrick's The Shining, and I obviously I'm a film person, so that's probably where how I'm gonna like lean. But the way that the events unfold and the ending of the film, and then so much of that Jack Torrance performance by Jack Nicholson is like, I mean, it's like, you want to talk about that bonus point thing that you're talking about, like that might be a legend,
man. It's so good, and every time I watch it, I notice some other little thing. I think you said that last time too, and I agree. Like every time I watch this movie, some little detail I notice. Part of it is that slow pace too. I think it invites you to look closely and to pay attention and to follow the sight lines and the eyes and like, what's he looking at? What's he doing? There's unsettling moments where it's like he looks at the camera and you're like, what is that supposed to mean? Is that him looking at, like the hotel? Is he looking at us? Like, why did Kubrick leave that in? To be so meticulous, you get to the point where you're convinced that every aspect of this movie was intentional, and maybe it was. And so you're trying to figure out meaning for everything, and it can drive you mad in a funny way. that is very appropriate for this movie.
I mean, I can go on and on about this one, but like I think again, like Jaws, this kind of redefined, I think, horror movies in a lot of way, and like how a horror movie can be so high level in terms of difficulty to pull off, and the like all of the elements weaving together in this perfect like kind of fabric. It's one of my favorite movies. It's one of my favorite horror movies for sure. And it's one that I remember last year really pushing to be in the top. The top 3. Didn't quite make it though.
All right, what was the next one you watched?
All right, the next one I watched was Blade Runner. Admittedly, one of my favorite movies ever. Talked about that. I think one of the first projects on the podcast, maybe the second or third project we covered, and it still remains there. Watching it this time, I was like, I just talked about atmosphere with The Shining, and that's maybe going to be a common thing for a lot of these really good films. But this, like, again, created, in a sense, in the visual language, a genre, the genre of cyberpunk. And I think Ridley Scott doing it to create atmosphere, but texture and a lived-in world. And it's like he took what he did with Alien, and he did it in this, like, future sci-fi dystopian kind of cyberpunk way. And this film is so, with the coming of AI, and I would, large language models are not this kind of AI, different kind of AI, but that's like kind of all in the zeitgeist right now. Mm-hmm. And like the ethics of AI, it's a conversation that people have been having for a long time. I think this film handles it so well. And I watched the final edit, the final edition cut. I think it's called the final cut, which was like Ridley's vision on it finally coming true so many years on.
That's the cut we stand by is the best.
Yeah. And it's like you strip out all that VO and you let the film really like explain itself to you. And the way that Deckard is going through the world and finding sympathy for these replicants, and the way that it's shot, again, it's a noir detective story that has elements of like, it's got the smoky rooms and the shadows and the blinds while people are kissing, and like, it's like, it is the noir.
Another slow-paced movie too. Super slow. But
slow burn, but oh my god,
again, that invites you to like really soak in every scene. Yeah,
culminates in like such awesome. And again, that's why I think it's good at allowing the viewer to interpret what is going on and what is going through Deckard's head. And Deckard as a character too. Like I believe at this point it's confirmed. Again, we're going to talk spoilers for a lot of these movies, but I think it's confirmed basically by Blade Runner 2049 that like he's a replicant. And this film, there was so much back and forth of the time. Was he a replicant? Wasn't he? And the performance by Harrison Ford to show all of that, and how you feel about Rachel, the replicant that we know is a replicant, but that he cares for, and like what does that love mean if like one person is a human and one is a replicant, but then come to find out it seems.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't know for sure that it's confirmed. It seems confirmed, but I don't know.
I think that's my favorite read on the story. I like the ambiguity, but my favorite read on the story ultimately is that
obviously
he was
he's aged, and like replicants aren't supposed to age in that way. So how is he able to do? There's like questions that still arise that I don't think have solid answers.
I want to rewatch that movie.
Yeah, it's been a little while since I've seen
I do think that
that would be one to rewatch too for sure.
It's amazing. I mean, it came out in 1982, and like the effects in it and the sets and everything within it makes such a real world that I believe it in every way, and I want to step into it, and I want to get a bowl of noodles, like sitting next to Deckard in this rainy dystopia neon environment. And I love this movie, and I have a lot of other reasons why, the significance of like the influence going forward, and like the futurism of it all, and then of course this corporation that's kind of controlling so much and creating these replicants, creating life in a sense, and doing it irresponsibly, and all that is just like really powerful, I think, as we're getting into this era that we're in right now in 2025.
Just when I think of visually stunning movies, this has got to be among the most. I mean, the Tears and Rain speech is just like one of the best moments in film, I feel like. Yeah,
Rutger Hauer, that
incredible.
That speech at the end, and like the emotion that you feel for, and again, I was talking about before, like emotional resonance and like emotional impact for me. That character is like the villain of the story, but I'm totally on that character's side. They only give these replicants 4 years to live, and it's eking away. So the desperation that's within them, I think it's like
kind of childlike in that way.
Yeah, and then up until the end, he saves Deckard, and then he talks about like enjoying life, and it's like his memories will be gone. All these things that he's seen that everyone on the planet can never imagine, And he's like, and they're just going to be gone. And it's like, that is relatable. That's a replicant saying something that's so relatable to us.
Tells us about our own
our
lives.
Memories, our memories will be gone like tears in rain.
Yeah. A beautiful film. Absolutely. So, definitely deserving to be up again. We can talk more as we go, but I think let's move on into another film. The next one I watched, which was Silence of the Lambs. So Silence of the Lambs, we were just on the Why the Book Wins channel recently, and that got all the way to the finals. As like one of the best adaptations, at least in that sort of March Madness style matchups of all time, and I think this is like, it's so incredible in the sense of an adaptation based off of the Thomas Harris novel, where it took all the iconic sequences from that book and it often translated them word for word into the film. So many of the discussions that Hannibal Lecter has with Clarice Starling is right out of the novel. This is one of the ones I always point to for ones that are super, super faithful. And yet so many smart changes were made as well. I always think about the oppressive male gaze of this movie, and not in the male gaze in the sense that we think of it today in like modern internet parlance of like sexualized gaze. It's more like Clarice Starling is being stared at by every man in this movie, and sometimes it is like a sexualized way, like he's staring at her in like a leering kind of way, but like it's like it's just a look, like there's an oppressive look. And the other thing it does is it has all these characters stare directly into camera, so they feel like they're looking at us in the same way, and we feel unsettled by the gaze, and that's part of what makes Hannibal Lecter so iconic. And then talk about, incredible performances of Anthony Hopkins. This is the stuff of movie legend, right? This is career defining for him. This is a movie that, I don't know, it shows me the heights that a horror film / thriller, I guess, but really a horror film can achieve. Obviously critically acclaimed. We got so many awards. Sets was groundbreaking in that sense. Howard Shore score as well, which is kind of incredible. Just such an iconic movie and just such a great example of adaptation that this feels super appropriate for being on the list.
I'm going to break the rules. I forgot to talk about the score for Blade Runner. Vangelis synth track is so iconic.
One of the best.
Unbelievable. But talking about Silence of the Lambs, I think of this as like the film that originally kicked off my interest in any sort of true crime stuff. And like it is like the film when I think of like a Mindhunter that I like, or even like true crime that I listen to on podcasts or anything like that. My fiance is really into that stuff, and so I listen to it quite a bit. But this is the thing that made me see like, oh man, like this is the dynamic. Like this is the getting inside the head of someone like this, and how dark it can be, but how revealing it can be, and how it can be used for good, and in ways when like channeled, with like Hannibal Lecter with Anthony Hopkins' character. But then like the like you can't control someone like that. You think you can, but ultimately like we know how that ends up for these characters.
And not only that, but this movie, if you think about it, is such a dynamic storytelling feat because. And this, all credit to Thomas Harris for coming up with this, but this is the blueprint of having a mystery and a thriller and a horror movie like this play out in a way that isn't as straightforward as it seems, right? It's an investigation into catching Buffalo Bill. Hannibal is the mentor character, and yet he is also like arguably the real villain, but then he is also this like one of the first examples I can think of the true anti-hero type where like you're kind of rooting for him at the end, even though he's doing horrific stuff, because he's so likable in some ways. He's so terrifying in others. He's such a fascinating character study. And then the whole time you're having this investigation going on, you're also having this like borderline creepy romance going on between him and Clarice, and like their bond and the respect they have for each other.
I always felt like it was like a mentor-mentee and less of like a romance. Like it was there's
a bit of romance, you could say, maybe. I think there, but you say it's like a parental love or something. It's unclear.
Of course it's unclear. It's very it's creepy is what it is.
Creepy,
like it's meant to be.
It's I mean Hannibal is a fucked up person, so like everything he talks about you have to wonder what other meanings there are. But I love the cat and mouse game he plays with her. And rewatching it, like the descent she goes, like the sequence of her arriving at his cell, what it takes for her to get down there, and all the setup that the filmmaker does to establish tension and establish the stakes. the layers of security, all the things, the rules that they lay out, him being at the end and her having to walk by all these other patients. It's like he's at the bottom of hell and she has to pass by demons to get there. It's incredible, and it's such great filmmaking. There's a reason this is up for so many awards. It's really, really, really good.
Not just up for, also
won.
It won. I think it won all best 5 of the major.
To win, or first horror film to win Best Movie, I think.
Yeah, Best Picture. I think it won the 5 big ones. It won Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay.
Incredible. Yeah, and what a good movie to be the one to do it. I mean, you could argue that maybe it shouldn't have taken this long, but like, for there to be a first to do it, this is a good contender. Doing
this level of prestige storytelling with something that typically is like thriller, pulpy, more like kind of detective story kind of thing. I think that it's really important and stands the test of time. Like I haven't seen it in a couple of years now, but it's going to be hard for this one to not make it into the top 3. We'll see. We'll see. All right. My next one that I watched was, and this is my final one.
Yeah. Your last one you watched. Yeah.
Was Children of Men. And Children of Men is a film that means so much to me because I think I saw it at a time when I was really becoming aware of like auteur filmmakers who have a message and have just multi-layered storytelling. And it's really easy one to look at and say like, look at the craftsmanship in this because there's all these incredibly long takes. The performances are so good. And then you want to talk about emotional resonance right now. ICE raiding, taking people from their homes all over the country.
We're recording this on June 10th, 2025. And right now, fuck off ICE demonstrations are happening in LA, whatever you want to call them, because we are seeing this crackdown by the current administration against immigration, which is at the heart of this movie.
It's so clearly a tool of like authoritarianism. And like this film is such a cautionary tale for that. And it's so crazy because like, I watched it at times in my life where I didn't think that I could see the country in this scenario again, at least. I mean, I don't know. I'm always surprised at how naive I can be, I guess is what I mean to say. But this film is so powerful in the messaging of, for one, the unification of what the storytelling is doing, the unification of men and like and people in general on Earth, and like what it looks like when people get desperate, when there is no future, there's no reason to continue on, but then to see the world like falling into these like, and I'm sure it's because of like fear mongering and people like unable to kind of cope with these things. They're looking for strong men, so they turn to authoritarianism, and racism, nationalism runs rampant, and it's all about like Britain is like the greatest power that's standing tall against this like this onslaught of immigrants and all these other things that are invading and
trying to
isolationist.
It's yeah.
And so the commentary there is like, it was so powerful. It's so moving to me right now. And honestly, like a film like this gives me hope at times for humanity, because I do believe in some of the goodness of humanity in these ways, and that like when push comes to shove, like people will come together and humanity will like support each other. And like, I love seeing like the championing of this like uprising really, but then into like how they are corrupted and the government is corrupted. And ultimately it's about like furthering humanity and the species and all of us together. And I don't know. It hit me really, really hard. And it's been one of my favorite movies for a long time. This adaptation, the book was really amazing as well.
P.D. James novel. This was such a good one to cover, such an interesting one. I think a lot of people don't know this is an adaptation, which is fair. It's pretty different. It makes a lot of changes. We'll get into it when I talk about ratings. I came up with this. But I want to agree. This is, when people ask me for my favorite movie, this is often the first one that comes to mind. It's a difficult question to answer, but when I've said this in the past, I've felt pretty good about it, because this is an incredible film. It's got a great message. I love what you're talking about, like hope, because I think that is essential to this movie too, of like, the hope is so fleeting and it's so fragile and yet so powerful when it comes, and it can unify. And yet the movie isn't at all like pablum about it. It's not trying to say like, oh, everything will be great. If we could just find a little hope, we'll all unify. No, it's like, it's fleeting and it's fragile and it immediately breaks, and unclear whether or not what kind of effect this can really have. So much of this is left up to interpretation, because I think the movie is asking the question, like, even if presented with the chance, is humanity able to seize onto it? Are we able to unite? Are we able to do things in our own interest? Or are we going to always squabble and tear each other apart? And I don't know that the movie necessarily has a hopeful ending. I think you can read it as having a slightly hopeful ending, and yet it's certainly not without debate, I think.
Yeah. Well, I would say like hopeful is, to me, means something different in this film.
Yeah.
Hopeful is that so many individuals put their lives on the line to ensure the future and to do the right thing, even though they didn't want to. Many of them didn't want to. Many of them did it in cowardly ways. But at the end of the day, like, humanity, the goodness of humanity wins out in a sense. And it's not like, oh, everybody goes home and there's flowers everywhere and everything's better and there's no more war. It's more so like just showing like there are those people, and like I would hope that, you know, everyone put into a corner like this would do the right thing and would choose to help it regardless. And I love the way that it deals with race and sex and like all these different elements for a 2006 film, but it deals with all these different elements in it, and it makes it so unified. It makes it so like you watch the film and you're like, none of it matters when it all falls away, and it's all about like continuing the species. It's not about this nationalism idea. Seems so silly when it's up against the continuing possibly species of man, you know?
Yeah, and honestly, it's like I can kind of just look at it as a metaphor too of like thinking for the future, thinking about the ongoing existence of humanity and not being caught up in our present day struggles. And at the end of the film, like, it's not about hope delivering; it's about just the existence of hope. And what's ironic is it like it asks you to hope in order to believe that there is hope at the end, because it doesn't tell us for sure. We see Cleo dies.
Theo, yeah.
Spoiler. And before we find out whether or not the ship at the end is what they think it is. We think it might be. We think it probably is.
It is, yeah.
And then the credits play and we hear children. And we're like, we can interpret that to mean something positive. But, you know, you're in that sense, you're kind of hoping that it means that. And so it invites you to hope that there is hope, and invites you to sort of participate in a way. It's really an incredible film, filled with all of these just like incredible shots that evoke like biblical scenes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a religious person, as we've gone over with Conclave, and yet I find this stuff super powerful. And then like the Oneers, stuff a legend. So
yeah,
there's so much we could talk about with this movie, but it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I want to say like I mentioned the ice stuff, but I specifically want to highlight with this film people in neighborhoods coming together and helping their neighbors in our country right now. Yeah. And I think that's an important message. That's what makes me proud and hopeful, and the idea that like I would hope that my neighbor would stand up for me and I would stand up for my neighbor. And like that's kind of the hope that I walk away with from the film. And it was incredibly moving with everything that's going on right now, and seeing like just having the fuck yeah of like, yeah, we're not going to let fascist regimes come into our neighborhoods and take away our friends and family. Yeah, it's like one of those films that like it's never not hit me squarely, and it just like is so powerful. And like you said, the cinematography is like world class and stuff of legends as well. And Alfonso Cuarón is like one of my favorite filmmakers, and I love him. His commentary on all of this is so unique as well, because like, yes, he's a Mexican filmmaker, but he's doing it from like the viewpoint of like Britain, and he's doing it with like all these different moving pieces that like it's like catering to different demographics and like again, I think unifying in a lot of interesting ways.
All right, so let's move on. We'll return to all of these when we are making our cuts, but the last film I watched was Arrival. So Denis Villeneuve is a favorite of the podcast. This is such an iconic project for us in the sense that amazing film. It was our chance to cover Ted Chiang, who is an incredible author. And we got to dive into the story of your life, which is the story that it's adapted from. And eventually we got to return and do a Creative Conversations episode with him, where we dove back into this film. And we got to talk to him about philosophy. We got to talk to him about free will, how he came up with such an iconic story. Such an amazing person to talk to. I just have so many fond feelings about this. And then this is a movie I've seen a bunch of times, but returning to it and watching it again, it's continuing to, it's always moving. You hear that, score come in, that we've heard in other movies now, we've always talked about, but it feels like it belongs to this film. It's like On the Nature of Sunlight or something like that. Absolutely incredible. And this is a movie that every time I watch it, I'm finding little details again, because there's visual motifs. There's, like there's sort of a rounded nature to a lot of the scenes. There's a lot of constant slow movement of camera that evokes sort of a curve. There's so many things like that that evokes sort of circularity, things folding back on themselves. It's a movie that is of a kind, and it's also one of those movies that you kind of have to watch more than once, because on a rewatch you're going to catch so many things, so many little lines that take on different meanings as you realize the context for Louise, and the things that the first time you watch the movie we assume are memories, we find out later are actually almost premonitions of things to happen, because she achieves this new way of viewing time. And then we start to see, in one of those like mind-blowing moments of things happening in different times affecting each other, and she learns about the non-zero sum game, and she's able to evoke that in this memory she has with her daughter that we learn later is actually a prophecy, and like she's like shifting in and out of time, and it's so trippy and so heady, and it just reminds me that I love sci-fi films like this, right? Like, It's not a big action thing. It's all about a concept and exploring it to its fullest. Just beautifully done. It's so human, and it asks us very profound questions about existence and like what we would be willing to do if we did have knowledge, and like is the time we have with somebody worth it if we know it'll end in heartbreak, it'll end in tragedy.
Well, that's
and
the
it just
nature
asks
of
profound questions that I absolutely love. I'll let you talk about it now. Tell me about Arrival.
No. I mean, it means a lot to me as well. I mean, I loved it when it came out. Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite filmmakers working. I think he's probably the best at doing these massive sci-fi kind of concepts and stories. And then, just Ted Chiang coming on the podcast and getting to speak with the man himself, and the way that he is able to be so articulate with his, like the way that he's forming these incredibly high level concepts that absolutely blow me away, that like one individual can create something like this, and while these concepts are so heady, have it be so grounded and emotional, and have it be so like connected to the human experience. That's the thing that I remember about Arrival the most, is like I love the way that it's like the most human story wrapped around the most like out of this world alien sci-fi journey, and like you said, it's not action packed,
much more akin to like a modern Tarkovsky film or something.
Yeah, totally. And like I respect it so much for all of those reasons. Ted Chiang, just like meeting with him, talking about it, elevated the film even more for me. I've seen it so many times, and I get more out of it each time, and like you said, the way that the attention to detail of the circularity of everything, and like that's the kind of thing that you need as like a through line in a film, to build on these layers, to have it mean so much more. And it's just a really impressive film.
An incredible feat of adaptation. Shout out to Eric Heiserer, who we know is the screenwriter who adapted this thing, because this was a story that even Ted said, like, he never thought this would be the one to get adapted. He was like, are you sure this is the one? You got the right story? And like the task of taking the story we had, which is really, really good, but changing it into something that's going to work for a film is a tall task to ask. And yet he was able to pull it off, and Villeneuve was able to deliver it. Really astounding. And I will say a lot of the message about language and humanity sort of coming apart and being unable to work together, and the frustrating misrepresentation and almost like radicalization that happens from our shattered media that is at the heart of this movie. When it came out, I remember thinking like, this tracks, but like, damned if it doesn't even land even better now with the coming years. How it almost feels like it was predicting something to come, and just how fractured we would get in our media ecosystem. Like
you said, the fact that the abstract like linguistics and the time travel elements or time theory elements being depicted in a film like this is just, that's a feat into itself. Like that's so it's such a hard thing to pull off and have the audience follow along with it. And I think most people who've seen this film are like, oh my God, this is one of the best sci-fi movies I've ever seen. And I do think if there's anything I would say about this film right now, just to start maybe some of the debate, is that the legend and the impact and I would say generational impact of this film is still growing. I think it's still like, because it's the newest, and we can talk about this with Children of Men a little bit as well, while it has been 20 years basically since it came out. It's like the impact is still growing, and some of these other ones, like, they're completely cemented at this point. But I don't think that should hold it back necessarily. You want to get into some of this deliberation?
Yeah, let's get into my ratings. And again, these ones, I'd be willing to hear from you if you ever think I got one of these wrong, let me know. But I'll tell you where I'm at with each of these. I'm going to start, I think last time I did like highest ratings to lowest rankings. I think I'm going to go the other way around this time, just to change things up. Once again, one of my lowest ranked movies is Blade Runner. Now, I do love this movie, don't get me wrong. But what happened was, I look at it and I said, okay, expression of the original, and this is where I dock 2 points. Because Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a beloved a beloved book by Philip K. Dick. Very different than what we got here, and very different in fundamental ways, I think. It's this is a situation where you could argue it really was more like where Ridley Scott came in and wanted to tell a different kind of story, right? He wanted to tell this story about replicants and artificial beings that he had kicking around in his mind. And he decided to use this Philip K. Dick novel as a jumping off point, but really huge liberties were taken. So if you ever wanted to see like a faithful adaptation of that novel, this isn't it. This is quite different. So yeah, I ended up going 8 out of 10 because I do still think there's a lot of excellent themes and ideas and concepts that are in there that totally do make the jump. Yeah. However, I did award 10 out of 10 for changes, because I think the changes that were made to make the story that Ridley Scott wanted to tell were incredible. I think indisputably amazing. I love the all the craftsmanship and the thought that went into the story he wanted to produce. I still docked 1 point from the final product. Maybe that's really controversial, but I still find this movie to be a bit ponderous at times, and as lush and beautiful as it is, I find some of the characters difficult to connect with emotionally to carry me through the story. And I find a lot of them to be kind of cold. Deckard can be kind of cold to watch. And I know that's very subjective, but that's just kind of my subjective read on watching this movie. And then I did give a bonus point for being historically important, because I think it absolutely is. Like you said, it defined the look of an entire subgenre in cyberpunk. But I didn't award one for performance. We've said in the past maybe you could argue something about like Rutger Hauer perhaps, or even Harrison Ford. But I didn't think either of those quite rose to the level that I'm trying to hold films to. For that performance point. And all of that adds up to 28 out of a possible 32, which ended up being the lowest, which is crazy to say.
That's insane.
Of a bunch of amazing movies. That is my only 28 that I have.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to argue the faithfulness, but for my money, like, this is that transformative adaptation. And I think, like, some of the time that is more impressive to me than a film that's, like, faithful, because then you're taking I would think a lot of people who are fans of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep got a lot out of Blade Runner, but absolutely. I don't think that it's like because it's faithful. I think because it's dealing with concepts that audience would be interested in. This is so hard for me, because when it comes to lists of my favorite movies, this is almost always making the top 10, I would say. Okay. And like, this is the kind of film that, like, I think as you watch, you talk about the pacing, and I think the more times I've seen the film, the faster it feels like it's going for me, even though I know it's going to happen. And some of those characters are so odd, but some of them, and I kind of know what you're like Pris, I believe her name is such an odd character, but I like how odd the character is because she's a replicant and they're trying to like find their way in the world, and they're like showing their own like perspective through the performance in a lot of ways. And I find it to be like, abnormal, but also something that has a lot of like richness to it. And there's a little portion, I think, in the final cut where you're starting to fall into a lull, like at the beginning of the third act. But the culmination of all of it is so strong that any part of me that thinks it's like kind of starting to spin its wheels a little bit, it's just like slam dunked by that final bit, and like the feelings that these replicants are able to pull out of me, these characters. And it is evoking some of that like distant noir detective who's walled off from everybody. So maybe that there's an element of that too that's like more difficult to connect with. But for all of those reasons, like the film historian, I'm not a film historian, but the part of me that wants to be a film historian reacts a lot to a noir film,
Amateur
a neo-noir film. Yeah, neo-noir story that like is in conversation with so much of what came before it, but also like redefining and like just like telling a story through like cinematic language and it defined, I think, not just like that subgenre, but also like you look at like, you know, like The Matrix is a direct through line from Blade Runner. Like there's so many that came after.
A lot
so
of just sci-fi in general,
films.
heavily influenced by it. And I don't debate any of that. I don't deny any of that. So saying all that with Blade Runner, is there any numbers in there that you think I should change?
I don't know that I would say that you would change them necessarily, but as I said before, like for me, the things that were like the emotional resonance and like the impact and like the filmmaking prowess and all of those things like come into play for my kind of ranking without a number. And like for me, Blade Runner was going to make my final 3. Like I was going to push hard for that one. But as you seem to be the lowest on Blade Runner, that'll be a long shot.
I think I'm the lowest on Blade Runner. And I didn't think that was going to be the case this year, but, you know, I'll go through my rankings and you can see why. So next up, I had my next lowest ranking was The Shining with a score of 29, which was the same as I gave it last year. I didn't end up thinking I should change it. But so just to go through it again, I gave it an 8 out of 10 on expression. And that's to respect that there is a lot of amazing things about this novel, this beloved Stephen King's novel, that didn't make it into the movie. There are things that he didn't have interest in putting into the movie. There's a message about Jack Torrance that doesn't make the film. You know, this was a character who was, while being a villain in a sense for the book, was much more of also the main character of the book, right? And we were so close to him, and we were following him, and he was struggling against what the Overlook was making him do. So much to where by the end, he is basically a zombie being animated by the hotel to do its bidding. This is a character that Stephen King redeemed, and Stanley Kubrick had no interest in telling that story, and he wanted to tell something different. So that gets us to the changes. I give it a 9 out of 10 because I mostly agree with the changes that were made. I like what he did. I do recognize and share some frustration with the changes that were made to Wendy to make her a lot less. I mean, it's an incredible performance, no doubt, still. But I think there was a little bit of a disservice done to that character to make her a little bit more of a damsel. And yes, he does a great job of conveying, maybe better than I've seen in any other movie, someone who is so afraid that she is struggling to even like operate her own body, and yet is able to still fight back, and overcome that fear and do the things that she does. So incredibly done, but I decided to knock a point because there are some changes throughout. DeCaloran's pretty significantly different. There's just certain things about it that I do quibble with that were made. So I went 9 out of 10. However, when we talk about it being an incredible film, I said 10 out of 10. This is an absolutely incredible film. So no points docked there. And then my 2 bonus points, historical significance, absolutely, slam dunk. And then we said performance, absolutely slam dunk. And so that's one of the reasons that this one got as high as it did, is that it got both of the bonus points. Because
this is like a culmination score for you, the faithfulness is going to hold both of these that we talked about so far back, maybe for a long time, against things that are more faithful. And I feel weird about that because I'm like, The Shining, like I guess.
Well, notably, it's not faithfulness; it's expression.
Okay.
It's how well did it express things about the source material. It doesn't have to be faithful to do that. There just needs to be things that feel essential that are expressed in the version we got.
But it's like, that's like consistency of messaging from source to adaptation. That feels like, that feels like the same thing to me. It feels like faithfulness. But anyway, I think The Shining is such an interesting example. I would say even more so than what we talked about with Blade Runner, of a material that was taken from something that was already iconic. And I think Philip K. Dick is iconic, but Stephen King is like one of the greatest living and possibly ever authors.
You can make an argument that at the time he wasn't what he became.
Yeah. But it's still his material and one of his fans' favorites. And taking something like that and changing it so fundamentally and then making one of the most iconic films ever and the most important films to horror is like, I think like the two-hander of this, like the project of as a whole of the source material and this, the impact of that as an adaptation is like one of the most, I mean, it's like you're going to start talking about adaptations, like The Shining has got to be one of the first things, because of the controversy as well, one of the first conversations you're having with people about adaptation, because it's like controversial, there's opinions all over the place, but it's like it's like a mythic level of impact and significance.
Yeah. So would you argue any of those points that I got wrong? Maybe like would you say maybe I should have given it 10 out of 10 for the changes because they were all something you stand behind, or
I would say so. Yeah, I would have gone 10 out of 10 on changes. Because
like
I guess
it is hard to look at that and say, like, you have to admit that there's something to the argument of like the difference between the movie and the book, and how some people are always going to fundamentally find that frustrating.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. If you're a Stephen King fan and like you hear that Stephen King doesn't like Kubrick's The Shining, like you want to get on his side, like there's no question that that's like a thing that's there. Yeah. I would push for the changes being 10 out of 10 because whether they were faithful or whether they were similar to or in the same spirit of the source material, they culminated in a film that is nothing but a 10 out of 10. I feel like in terms of an adaptation.
All right, we can table that for now. Let me give you my one movie. I'll jump around a little bit. I'm going to give you my highest ranked movie, and then I'll give you the other ones because they all tied.
Let's go. Yeah, because I want to see if we're on the same page.
So my highest ranked movie got a 31 out of a possible 32 points. I think the only movie that we've ever done that got a 32 out of 32 for me was The Godfather, and that's Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. It got a 10 out of 10 on expression for me. I think everything that's great about that book is in this movie. It's absolutely incredible. Changes 10 out of 10. This is just a masterclass in translating from one medium to another, and yet making a movie that is absolutely incredible. Award-winning, memorable, iconic movie, which is ultimately the 10 out of 10 final product. Actually, you know what? I just said it. So 10 out of 10. I put 9 out of 10 here. And this is one I was on the fence about because I love this movie, but I'm like, usually I don't put it as like my favorite movie. It's really up there, but I don't know. I docked it 1, but I was like, I kind of wanted to do a 0.5, but then I didn't want to get into 0.5s. So this is a close one. I'm between a 9 and a 10. I don't know. What do you think? Is this a 10? Is that a 10 out of 10 film to you?
I'll give my perspective on it. Yeah, it's so good and it's so iconic with the performances, and I think it defines that sort of like true detective cop story, and then it also has the true crime elements of all of it. Like I think it's so important for all of those reasons. But this was the last one to fall out of my projected top 3. I thought that this would make it, and I thought that this one was going to be like, this one's definitely on our top 3. I felt like you were gonna push for it. This was the last one to fall out. I could be swayed into it being there, but for me, it's like, while it's such a fascinating film, it doesn't move me in a way that like makes me feel like it is I don't know, transcending a story that I'm experiencing. Whereas like I would say like Children of Men, for example, is something that like that is like bringing tears to my eyes in a way that makes me feel like, I don't know, maybe it's not fair to compare them, but like the humanity that's baked in that.
I would have felt that way too. I think this rewatch helped me a little bit in that regard because like I recognize the message about Clarice's backstory, where she tells the story about trying to save the lambs and then how she is powerless to save them. They are taken back and killed anyway, and how Lecter is able to realize what this means about her, and that the reason she became an FBI agent is because she still hears those lambs screaming and she wants to silence them, right? And it's like her whole purpose in choosing law enforcement and choosing this job that is so resistant to her entering it, and yet what makes her so good at it. It's a really interesting character study there. I don't know. There's more than meets the eye with this movie in many ways, but like ultimately, I see what you're saying, and like again, I was kind of in between a 9 and a 10 for like final product, because as good as it is and as profound as it is, does it quite reach the level of a Children of Men or something like that, where it's like it really feels like it's on this next level? I don't know.
It's a difficult thing. So I mentioned Letterboxd recently. I'm trying to start using it more often, and it'd be a fun thing to kind of interact with some of our listeners on. I've been trying to watch a movie per day. It's a difficult task, but I've been like sticking by it fairly closely. I'm not able to do it all the time, but as much as I can. I mean, it's the feel. I have to like. I just realized like I wanted to start watching more movies again. So I've been really pushing for it. And like I wanted to say, like you were asking, is this a 10 out of 10 film? I think if I was to score it on Letterboxd, let's say, I would give it a 5 out of 5 stars. I would give most of these films 5 out of 5 stars. So it's really difficult for me to not say, oh yeah, of course it's a 10 out of 10. But in arguing these kind of against each other, it's so hard. Like, do I think that Silence of the Lambs deserves to be on the list? And if I had rewatched it, would that also have raised it in my estimation?
Yeah.
Probably.
Might have, yeah.
And I do think it should be in our Hall of Fame. I just don't. There's some on here that I'm like that I thought would be, and especially like the bias for Blade Runner. Like, let's say Blade Runner falls off because it's your top, and it was my like third to make it into the Hall of Fame. If that falls off, I think that means technically Silence bumps in as my third, but we'll see kind of which other ones you have.
I just want to finish out what I was going to say on that movie is that it gets the historical because of its sweeping of the awards, and then it also gets the performance, of course, for Anthony Hopkins, absolutely iconic. So that's why that one scored so high.
Were there any of these films that didn't get the cultural significance?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right, go ahead.
So now let's say the other three are all tied at 30 for different reasons. I'll go through each of them. So Children of Men, I gave a 9 out of 10 on expression. Maybe you could argue this should be an 8 out of 10. And it's for similar reasons to what I've talked about for The Shining and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. This P.D. James novel is pretty dang different. I remember the entire second half was quite different. It really feels like while there is some thematic similarities and some sort of existential questions and the nature of hope, some of that is absolutely in both. It really feels like Cuarón identified a book with a really cool premise and sort of setup that he could use to tell a story that was pretty different and yet feels of a kind for sure, but was pretty different.
Yeah.
And it was kind of his own story. And I love movies like that. I don't want to like say it's, obviously one of my favorite movies, but when I'm being honest about adaptation, I look at it and go, you could argue someone, if there were like a diehard P.D. James fan out there, I could see someone looking at this and saying this isn't an accurate adaptation. There are things that I missed from the book that didn't make it into this version. I can see that. I don't agree with them because I think this is one where the movie is superior, but I can see that argument.
And I do want to push for this one more time, is that I think there's something to be equally renowned for a film that is transformative from the source material. Like, I think that that's something that's just almost as notable as being incredibly faithful. If they do it if they're so transformative that they make a film that's like equally impactful or more impactful than the source material, I feel like that is almost worth applauding as an adaptation process in a sense.
It is, well. And again, this is splitting hairs to try and determine what can make it in our 3 slots, right? And we're talking about an Adaptation Hall of Fame, not a Best Movie Hall of Fame. And so when I'm thinking about the best adaptations of all time, I grant you that kind of adaptation can be just as good, but like, would you give the nod to the one that also manages to be really faithful in addition to making incredible changes? Like,
I don't know that I would.
I don't know. Like it. You gotta give it the nods for some reason. So let me continue my rankings here. I did give it a 10 out of 10 on changes because I love the changes that were made. Once again, I think these were incredible changes. I think this is a better movie. I think this is a better story. 10 out of 10 on changes, 10 out of 10 on final product. We've already talked about all the reasons why. I think this is a historically significant movie because I think these oneers, in my sort of concept of oneers and what I saw people talking about, I think this sort of laid the groundwork, and it was almost like throwing a gauntlet down where I saw other filmmakers like wanting to rise to the challenge of what they saw in this movie. Maybe that's not true, but like that was my sort of outsider perspective. Like, do you think that this was a memorable enough to where you would say this is a historically significant moment in film and how this movie was made and in a series of wonders? Because this was the movie that, to me, had the most hype around the Wonders. Before I even saw the movie, people were talking about, you got to pay attention for Wonders. It was like so hyped and such a big deal, and it was something I had never really thought about. I know they had been done, but I just didn't think about them as much.
I think that's what it did. I think it did really well with like bringing it to, whether that was marketing or what that was. I think that they like that, and it shows again, like that's a level of craftsmanship that takes so much planning, and it's so like it's so expensive, but it's showing like an intention on the work and in like wanting to pull off something for a reason. But like, I mean, there are many filmmakers that have been doing wonders for a long time.
Sure.
Martin Scorsese,
Spielberg,
Steven Spielberg. Yeah. Like these guys, they like, he didn't like, Cuarón didn't like redefine it necessarily, but he did bring it into a film.
And he did it with so many moving parts and like an action sequences that are really difficult to do in something like this.
I would say the energy of it definitely sells in a crazy way to where it's like almost drawing attention to the fact that you're watching a wonder, where you're like, sometimes you may have seen wonders in other films before, but they're subtle.
Yeah, I feel like Spielberg's wonders are often so subtle that you don't notice them almost. Like it's sometimes looking for them.
He's got some pretty sweeping ones as well. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like when you're in like an action scene like that, or like the blood splatters the lens and it stays there for a while, you're like, holy shit, like this hasn't cut in a long time.
Yeah, it really draws attention to that. Yeah. So anyway, I gave it the historical. I did not end up giving it for performance. I think Clive Owen is great in here. It's my favorite movie he's done. There are side characters who give memorable performances. But I didn't think anything quite rose to the level of iconic. Yeah. So I did not. I withheld that point. That wound that one up at 30. Let's talk about Arrival. So Arrival. First off, I also just want to say I watched it on Amazon, and the moment where Louise is inside the ship and speaking with the aliens for the first time face to face with no barrier between them, and the heptapods tell her, Abbott is a dying process. Use weapon unlocks time. Like really, really essential reveals. The subtitles are not in the movie for the aliens.
Maybe there's like a you have to go into the subtitles category.
It's not a setting.
Pick alien subtitles.
Yeah. It's not a setting because I turned on and off English subtitles. Doesn't matter. The subtitles for English only do hers. They don't do the aliens. In the original, like the version I saw, there's like black subtitles that pop up in screen for the aliens. Those are just gone. I don't know how this happened, but like it's a thing you read on the internet. Apparently, it was also true on Netflix when Netflix released the movie. That same scene had the same problem. That is wild to me because that means there are how many thousands of people have probably seen this movie now,
and
where that scene is fucking confusing as hell because you don't know what they're saying.
Yeah,
unbelievable to me that this is still the reality of this movie. Anyway,
that's crazy. That's maddening. Just to do the thing that I do often. That's why I advocate for physical media.
Absolutely.
Buy the fucking 4K Blu-ray and you will never have to deal with that.
Unbelievable. Anyway, Expression of the Story by Ted Chiang. I gave this a 10 out of 10. I think that everything that is profound and moving and beautiful about this story made its way onto screen. Sure, it changed form, but it didn't feel to me like there was essential things left behind. That's not to say you shouldn't read the story. I do think you should. There's always going to be things that a story can do better. But I felt like this fully expressed the story in a way that you can do in film. So I gave it a 10 out of 10. Once again, changes, I gave it a 10 out of 10. I think all the changes that were made were smartly made to make this into an entertaining film. And yes, you can be kind of cynical about that and like talk about kind of the explosions and the chaos, but like I feel like over time I've actually turned around on that and kind of softened to it because like it is such a important story to tell and such a true story to tell about the squabbling and the lack of communication and the way that we are so often break ourselves apart as humans. It actually really works for me these days. Final product, this is a 10 out of 10 movie for me. This is one of my favorite movies. Absolutely incredible. The only thing that I think, so that's a perfect 30 if you give a score. But I didn't end up giving either bonus points because I don't know that anything about this movie is particularly groundbreaking to the point to where it is going to be change the way movies are viewed. I mean, maybe we just haven't had enough time yet to look back.
That's what I was saying earlier. Is like I just think that it's still in that. I think 10 years on, 20 years on, which we are almost 10 years on from the film now, but 20 years on, I think that people, and there's so much content these days. But I think if given the opportunity, the film will mean a lot, and it's going to resonate for a long time. And I do think it'll be impactful going forward. I think honestly, in terms of Denis Villeneuve's filmography, I still think it's unique in what it's able to employ. Like I think he's done so much good stuff, but this is like
it'll be really interesting one day to look back at his career. You know, at some point he retires and say where does this rank in all of his movies because he's got so many good ones.
All right, well I think we can go home. All 6 join our Hall of Fame and we're good.
Wait, I haven't talked about Jaws yet.
Oh,
so
okay,
Jaws is the last one.
Yeah.
I'll quickly go through 10 out of 10 of expression. I think everything that was good about that novel made it into this book. Once again, there was a whole section in there about like there was like was it Hooper and what's the main guy's name? His wife. They have like an affair, and then there's all this stuff with the mafia and this threat, and like Quint's a little different for sure. There's differences, but I felt like everything that was good about the book made it into this movie. So I wanted to give this a 10 out of 10. You can maybe argue it. I think the changes that were made were incredible.
I would say based on what we said as far as like Blade Runner and the others, I would say it's transformative, better in a lot of ways, but doesn't necessarily stick to all of the spirit of it. I don't know.
See, but again, I think you're viewing it as a faithfulness metric, whereas I have a slight distinction that it's the things that I think are core and good, not just factually true, but are good and essential to the story of the book that you could like legitimately miss and feel like could have been in the film. If those don't make it, that's where I was knocking a little bit of expression, like something was left on the table. Whereas for me, like anything that was left off of this was deservedly so I'm not going to knock points for it. And I know that's a small distinction, but that's the way I'm like, it's not truly a faithfulness metric in the way that I'm trying to think of it. So I gave it 10 out of 10 in expression, 10 out of 10 on changes because I love the movie that was changed and made. I ended up giving this a 9 out of 10 final product. And again, that's like only in the same way that I might give Silence of the Lambs a 9 out of 10. Absolutely incredible movies, super high on my list of like movies of all time. Is it one of my favorite films? No. So maybe but it's right there, man. It's like right on knocking at the door. So, this is one of those where it's like 9.5 would probably be more accurate. I gave it a point for history because obviously everything we talked about with how this movie was made is absolutely iconic. But I didn't give one for performance, and maybe you should argue that I should have, but there's a lot of great memorable performances in here. Is there anything that rises to the level of truly iconic? I don't know. I don't think so.
You could definitely argue it. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. That's a bunch of stuff at 30, one thing at 31, and I've given I don't know if this has cleared anything up. I look at this list and I'm like, oh God, this is a really fucking hard one, man. So I don't know. Like I feel like I've laid out how I'm feeling. It's all on the table now. I want to know more about how you're feeling. You said you had 3 that you thought were definitely going to make it, 3 you thought weren't. After this whole conversation we've had, do you feel the same way? Has anything moved for you? And what are those 3?
So the 3 were Blade Runner, which we've talked about, and we can kind of go back and forth on that. And I think that there's a bias entering here just in terms of like significance to me, significance to sci-fi in general, and like what a transformative adaptation is. The other one is Children of Men, and then my other that was making it was The Shining. I feel like in the conversation we've said enough to sway me to and let's say this. I also felt like when I watched Jaws, of the 3 that I watched, I like Jaws a lot. I really enjoy it. I enjoy what Spielberg did with it. It's incredibly iconic. We talked about it already. But it was the lowest of the 3 for me. Mm-hmm. And it came down to like, it's a great summer blockbuster. It doesn't rise to like the impactful level, emotional impact wise, of like a Children of Men or a Blade Runner for me. Blade Runner, like I think is connecting.
Let me address the Jaws comment because I think this is an interesting point because last year we put in Jurassic Park. And one of the reasons we said we put in Jurassic Park was we felt like it sort of perfected a lot of what Jaws started. And if that's the case, I mean, you could say something like should be given to the movie that started it. But I'm kind of with you. It's kind of like I would be okay making Jaws wait as good as it is. I think this isn't necessarily a first ballot kind of movie for me. This is a movie that is right there, but I'm not sure it should get in right away. Whereas I felt differently about Jurassic Park. I think if it were to come down to it again, I'd still choose Jurassic Park over it. And I think that tells you something, right?
I definitely agree. And it feels weird to even have the conversation to put in like Jaws and Jurassic Park in the same 6 for now in our Hall of Fame. So I think we can narrow down Jaws for now. I love it. We've already talked about how iconic it is. So I feel like Silence of the Lambs is bumping into my top 3. Yeah.
To me, that was my highest rated one. I thought that was the one I couldn't keep out just based off of my metrics. I felt like it had to go in, and like maybe it should have been a perfect 32 out of 32. Even I might have even sold it short by calling it the 9 out of 10 final product.
But I do agree. Like there is something about the film that doesn't it's not in my, it doesn't make my top 10 favorite films of all time. And there's some things to be, and like, I know that that's a bias, but like,
but when we're talking about best adaptations of all time, which is ultimately what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's right there, though.
It seems like it needs to be in there. I'm just saying, like, if I was to lower it, the reason it's only just barely making it, it's that's the reason, is that it just doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't.
I'm not ready to say that's a lock, but it's definitely not eliminated yet. Is there any other ones we think we might be able to set aside?
Set aside or lock? Because there's another one I want to push for a lock.
I mean, have we locked in?
Yeah. No.
Silence?
No, I don't think we have.
Okay, you think we have one we can lock?
I think Children of Men for me is one that, like, I after walking away from it, I was like, this one for me is gonna make it, and I'm gonna fight for hell or high water.
That wasn't in your original 3.
It was.
Oh, it was Children of Men, Shining,
The Shining, and Blade Runner.
Okay, I'm with you on Children of Men. I am behind it. I am willing to lock it. I think that movie is absolutely incredible piece of work.
In terms of your scoring and everything like that, I do agree. The performances are like, there's nothing like completely like career defining that's happening in the film as far as performances, other than Alfonso Cuarón, the director. I think career defining for the director is important.
World building done in the background this is a master class in that. Like, just subtle world building being done in little details that you could miss, that go by, the behind the backgrounds in all these scenes tells so much about the world.
You know what the subtext of the story is, you know what the metaphors and the allegories that are being employed are here, but it is still like a subdued story. Like, it's not like, you notice that like the main character never picks up a gun and starts firing back.
Well, notice that one thing you can notice too is the way animals all treat Cleo.
I love it. Yeah. And I think it's Theo, right? Theo?
Oh, is it Theo? Yeah, Theo. I think I said Cleo before.
But yeah, I love it.
Admittedly, I'm not the one who watched this movie, so my memory sucks. You're right, it's Theo.
Dogs are all over the place, and I love the way that the dogs are representing, like, children are no longer being born, and like everyone is so like attached to their dogs in that way, and I think that is really powerful.
What's his name? The guy from Batman gives a really cool performance here.
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine, such a great performance in this movie. I mean, it's not quite the iconic, but like really good Michael Caine performance, really memorable.
It's really good, and you love that character. Like, he's like fuck fascists.
So
he's
cool,
like a cartoonist in an age that like they're all this authoritarian stuff is cracking down, and he lives out in the woods off the grid and stuff, and he's caring for his wife.
Yeah, the sacrifice he makes is so moving.
I can go on, but let's talk about some of these other
Let's lock that one in. I think I'm safe to say we've locked that one in, just so we can continue to make progress here, because we got to move. Yeah. We do have to end this episode at some point.
Yeah, The Shining is the other one that I had in there. It almost made it last time. I pushed for it really hard. I understand why it doesn't. The faithfulness is going to hold it back, but in terms of when I think of iconic or best adaptations, I think The Shining is always going to make the list for me. I am a big horror fan. I like horror in general. I think Kubrick is a master of filmmaking. I like the fact that there is like I said, this two-hander of like Steven Spielberg's work and Kubrick's work, and how like the two maybe didn't even agree on a lot of these things, but how each can be impactful. And like, to me, like that the overall project feels like one of like a defining adaptation.
Yeah. Hard to argue against that, man. That's one that I came prepared to let it in. I feel like we talked about last year how we were going to make it wait a year, but probably it was going to make it in, and I felt that way going into this. And really, it's just the absolute quality of the things that we would have to be holding out of it is the only reason that I'm on the fence on it at all.
Which we're talking about at this point is Arrival is our remaining.
Silence. So we got Arrival, we got Silence. We said Jaws is out. Blade Runner. So Blade Runner, you're okay to say is out?
Well, I don't feel okay with it, but I also like I can look at the film and know that like it's maybe not if I was to talk about like For the People, it's not going to be everybody's favorite adaptation or in the list of best adaptations. It makes my list of favorite films.
I think it'd be in the list of best, but yeah. It depends on how long the list is.
Yeah, that's what I'll keep pushing for this movie to make it.
It's an interesting one because if it doesn't make it this year now, we've had 2 years in a row. We've both watched it, and it didn't make it either time. And I mean, I guess we'll just have to see. Maybe things will loosen up and they'll be feel like we have more slots to get it in. But it's starting to feel like this might be a tough task to get this thing in. But I feel like it's deserving. It's just like every year it comes up against movies that I think are more deserving. So it's tough.
I hope not. It is to me. It is the sci-fi film. Like it is like 2001 you can talk about as the sci-fi film, but for me, like Blade Runner is the sci-fi film. Like that's the first thing I think of. So it's like I hope it gets a chance to make it in there. We'll see. So now we're talking The Shining, Arrival, and Silence of the Lambs for 2 slots.
It sounds like to me like you have one picked out of those 3 that you would say doesn't make it in, and that's Arrival.
I hate saying it too. I don't know. I think we should talk it through, because I think Arrival means so much to this podcast that I would like to see it in our Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It's so new that the impact, I think, is a little hard to define.
Newest movie on this list?
Honestly, it's the Ted Chiang element of it and the emotional, like how powerful that emotional with the heady sci-fi topics.
Yeah.
That
that's the thing that makes me want to put it in is really the difficulty of adapting this story and making this movie is so immense. And the fact that they were able to pull it off, and it was as incredible as it was, it's really amazing to me. It feels a bit like I still feel like Arrival is still kind of this cult movie. I know people saw it, but like I meet so many people who've never seen it to this day. I think because it maybe rightfully wasn't touted as this big action vehicle, so maybe a lot of people didn't feel like they needed to run out and see it, and then it just kind of faded from people's minds. But this is such an incredible film. If I ever meet somebody who's a sci-fi fan, this is like something I'm always going to recommend to them if they haven't seen it yet, because it's so good.
It's definitely the kind of film, and I think I was thinking about this with Blade Runner too. Like, it's the kind of film where I want to introduce it to people. Like, I want to sit down and watch it with them, and then have a conversation after the fact, because those topics are so fun to just dig into with people. And I think you learn something about people that you have conversations with about these films.
I find this movie emotionally powerful.
Me too.
And it's one that, even if I'm not erupting into tears because I've seen it so many times, I still find it deeply moving every time I see it. I think it's a profound film. It's mind-blowing in the best way. It's one of those movies that, like, I've seen it so many times, I'm not seeking it out on my own to rewatch, but if I ever meet somebody who hasn't seen it, like, I always love to watch a movie with somebody like that, so I can kind of see it again with fresh eyes as they experience it.
I think if I'm to choose between The Shining or Silence, if you were going to push for Arrival to make it in, I think Silence falls off for me and The Shining goes in. But I think that when I look at the Silence of the Lambs and The Shining, they might beat out Arrival. I love that film, and it means so much to me, especially in this podcast.
You're saying both of those movies might beat out Arrival?
I just think they have the advantage of...
I think Silence beats The Shining for me personally, because it's such an incredible version of an adaptation that was able to be as faithful as it was while still making the jump. It's just kind of like a proof that it is possible to do, and still make an incredible film. Yes, maybe the final product isn't quite rise to the level of The Shining, which is obviously debatable. That's kind of where I'm at with
it. While that's true,
yeah,
I think I'm rewatching The Shining before I rewatch Silence.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. After just rewatching Silence, I'm like, this movie's really fucking good.
It's great. It's a great really movie. Good. It's really good. I'm just saying between those two, like I've seen The Shining a million times, and I'll continue to see it a million more.
Well, see, I guess for me, it's like Shining versus Arrival, because I think Silence deserves it. I think Silence is I would definitely choose Silence over Arrival. I don't know if I would choose Shining over Arrival. We can talk about it. But I think I would definitely choose Silence over Arrival. So if that's the case...
Well, my thing is, like, I'm choosing Shining over Silence. So we're, like, at an impasse there. Yeah.
But would you choose Shining over Arrival?
I think so, yeah. That's kind of why I'm like, I want Arrival to be in there. But I think that the impact of the Silence of the Lambs and The Shining... And I think Arrival is a modern masterpiece. But I think we're talking about movies that, like, redefined genres. And Arrival didn't do that yet.
Yeah. So, okay. Do I want to relent here and let Arrival go? It's such an important movie for us.
I know. That's the thing that sucks, yeah.
Honestly, it's like I kind of don't want to revisit Shining again, because like I don't feel like anything's going to change about it, and yet we're still going to be right here again, like wanting to put it in. So it's like maybe that's a bad reason to say just put it in, but maybe.
We would be inducting Children of Men for what it's worth, which is more modern. So I don't feel terrible that we're only inducting things that were pre-2000, you know, like like sometimes I'm like, I don't want to be only inducting old movies.
Yeah.
But they do have the advantage of just like being around for longer and creating more of a cultural impact in some ways.
And then, I mean, it's Children of Men. It's a lot of dark movies, but I mean, hey, Silence of the Lambs and The Shining. Are we ready to announce it? I don't know, man. I just feel so torn. I'm sad about Arrival.
For what it's worth, I mean, like you said, we did get to this point with The Shining last time, and we were like, if Shining gets here again, I think we just put it in. I feel like those maybe weren't the words we said, but it was like I felt the vibe. Yeah. So maybe this is the same situation with Arrival, and we're just like, Arrival's making it next time.
I'm revisiting the idea of Arrival over Silence.
Okay.
I don't know. Silence had the highest ranking for me, so I'm going against my rankings to even consider it.
I think there's something to be said for the fact that both of us admit that Silence isn't necessarily like a better movie than The Shining, or
Arrival.
I don't know, Arrival. Were you at 10 out of 10 on Arrival for?
I think I am. You know, I will admit that there was a time where I was knocking more off of it. And it's like one of those weird ones where like my criticisms about the movie have faded over time. And now I just like it more and more for what it is.
Yeah.
And respect it more for what it is. I as much as I'm saying it, I know in my heart that Silence of the Lambs, when I'm talking about adaptations to people and they ask me what are some of the best, one of the first ones I'm going to reach to is Silence. It just is such a good example of a faithful adaptation that nailed everything about the adaptation process. And like, as much as we're quibbling about how good of a movie it is or isn't, it's like it's an incredible movie. It's just like whether or not it's one of our favorites. It's highly subjective. A lot of people would say it is one of their favorites. I feel really good about putting in Silence. Yeah. And Arrival will have its shot, I think down the road. Yeah, I think I've come around to it.
I really wanted to put it in. Yeah. All right. Because it's just like I said, that's our podcast defined. Like we've had Ted Chiang on, we've talked about it multiple times. Like I advocate, I champion that movie. And
if one thing we know is that next year likely you will be watching Arrival because it's probably going to make the top 6. I guess we can't guarantee it. We'll have to see, but I have a feeling this is going to be much like The Shining one that we're going to be talking about again. And next year, when we do our 2026 induction. But for now, let's go ahead and announce the class of 2025 for the Adaptation Hall of Fame, The Shining, making it in its second year of eligibility. This is the Stanley Kubrick film from 1980, adapted by the Stephen King novel. We have Children of Men, 2006, Alfonso Cuarón film, adapted from the P.D. James novel. And then we have Silence of the Lambs. This is the 1990, I believe,
91.
Jonathan Demme film adapted from the Thomas Harris novel. What an iconic trio of films we are putting in here. I think well deserved. It's really just more about being sad about some of the ones that were left off. But cheers, hooray, clapping. We are proud of these films. Congratulations to all of them.
And they're joining Jurassic Park, Godfather, and Fellowship of the Ring. So those high praise for all 3 of these.
We now have 6 movies that are indisputably some of the best adaptations ever made. Once we put them in the hall, all ratings are wiped clean at that point. These are all of equal stature in the Hall of Fame. Some of the best to ever do it. So this was a challenge, man. I knew this was going to be a tough year, and it was. But thank you all for sticking with us for all this time. Or if you're a new listener, we thank you for joining us. Hopefully you enjoy these kind of conversations. We like to do it every now and then to break up our regular routine, which we will be returning to in a couple weeks here with Murderbot. So looking forward to that. It should be super fun. But yeah, 350 episodes. Cheers to all of you.
Cheers.
And, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, give a like to the video. Comment below and let us know what 3 projects you would have put in out of these 6. Really curious to know, where people disagree with us. I'm sure there'll be many places that they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's so subjective, and people are going to be bummed, but so am I.
Yeah, we're all in pain together here, guys. Like this is tough. Nobody's fully happy, which is probably the best way to do it.
Well, I am happy and proud of the Hall of Fame continuing to be pretty prestigious. So I hope you guys like this, and thank you for 350. You guys have been along with us for this whole journey. And if you wanted to support us in another way, we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film. We do bonus episodes over there, usually adaptation adjacent. We get experimental over there. We have a lot of fun. And it really helps to continue this podcast, keep us going.
Yeah, and that's where we did our deliberations, where we narrowed it down from 10 to 6. And if you're curious why there aren't any Lord of the Rings films up this year, you can find out why in that episode. Is a little teaser for that. We talk about why, because technically both Two Towers and Return of the King were eligible this year. which is something maybe we should have revealed earlier, but they weren't in this. So listen to that to find out why not. And yeah, connect with us on social media. We are everywhere at Ink to Film, Facebook, TikTok, Blue Sky. We're all over the place, Instagram. We'd love to connect with you. I guess that's going to be it for this week, man. We will be off for a little bit, but then returning for Murderbot, which is a project we've been looking forward to for a long time. So yeah, excited about that. And until next time,
keep adapting.